Before the gates even open, Corcoran State Prison tells its own story, a story written in decades of investigations, controversy, and decisions that reshaped California's entire correctional system. This isn't rumor. This isn't legend. These are the documented events that made Corcoran one of the most scrutinized prisons in the United States. Today, we're stepping inside the place where oversight was tested, policies were rewritten, and history still echoes through every locked corridor. Before we begin, tap like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us uncover the darkest corners of the prison system. Now let's step inside. Before you ever set foot inside Corcoran State Prison, one reality becomes clear long before the gates open. This facility has a documented history unlike any other in California. For more than 3 decades, Corcoran has been at the center of some of the most heavily investigated incidents in the state's correctional system. The controversies, the federal scrutiny, and the internal policy failures weren't rumors or exaggerated stories. They came from official reports, court documents, and statewide investigative journalism. This documentary goes inside that history. The beginning of Corcoran, 1980s, 1988. Corcoran State Prison officially opened in February 1988, during one of the most transformative periods in California corrections. By the mid-1980s, the state's prison population had exploded due to tougher sentencing laws, mandatory minimums, and an increase in long-term incarceration. The system was overcrowded, under pressure, and rapidly expanding. Corcoran was built as part of that expansion, but not as a typical prison. It was designed as a Level 4 maximum security institution, intended for inmates the state classified as high risk, high profile, or difficult to manage in standard facilities. From the moment it opened, Corcoran was one of the most secure and tightly controlled prisons in California. Its large compound stretched across a massive area of the Central Valley, with the capacity to house thousands of inmates and multiple specialized housing units. But the story of Corcoran isn't just about size or concrete. It's about what the facility became known for in the years that followed, and how documented events placed it under national attention. A facility built for control. Corcoran's design was created to maintain strict supervision over inmates who required constant monitoring. The prison includes general population yards, administrative segregation units, protective custody units, mental health housing, the security housing unit, a situ known for long hours of cell confinement. Movement inside the prison is controlled through guard towers placed around the perimeter, electronically controlled gates, central command centers, corridors built for restricted, monitored movement. On paper, the architecture served a clear purpose: to separate, monitor, and control California's most challenging inmates. But in the years ahead, these same structures would appear repeatedly in investigations and audits examining the controversies that shaped Corcoran's reputation. Inside Corcoran, everything was engineered around control. From the moment the prison opened, its internal structure was designed to separate inmates based on risk level, behavior, and gang affiliation. The facility's network of housing units functioned like separate worlds within the same compound, each operated under strict rules and constant supervision. Corcoran's most secure areas remained its administrative segregation units and the security housing unit, where inmates could spend the majority of their day confined to their cells. These were environments built for individuals considered dangerous, disruptive, or vulnerable. In many cases, inmates inside these areas rarely interacted with anyone outside their assigned tier. Movement throughout the prison followed a rigid system. Every hallway door, every gate, and every yard opening was electronically controlled and monitored by correctional staff. Towers around the yards provided elevated vantage points for officers assigned to oversee inmate activity, while central control rooms coordinated movement across the facility. The design made it extremely difficult for inmates to reach areas they were not authorized to enter. On paper, this level of structure was meant to reduce risk and prevent violence. Corcoran was intended to operate with precision, every movement scheduled, every interaction supervised, and every housing decision based on detailed classification reviews. But despite the heavy security and the rigid protocol, early warning signs appeared within the first years of operation. Internal reports and audits raised concerns about the frequency of violent incidents, the challenges staff faced managing high-risk inmates, and the growing strain on a system still adjusting to California's rapidly expanding prison population. By the early 1990s, Corcoran's reputation had shifted. What was once seen as a highly controlled, high-security institution began drawing attention for reasons that were both documented and troubling. Investigators examining the prison noted patterns of conflict on the yards, communication failures between staff, and inconsistencies in the way use-of-force incidents were handled. These findings would later form the foundation for some of the most significant investigations in the prison's history. The warning signs were there in audits, internal memos, and patterns of incidents. And these signs would lead directly into the chapter of Corcoran's history that placed the facility under national scrutiny. By the mid-1990s, Corcoran State Prison entered one of the most scrutinized chapters in its history. This period became widely known through public reports, court documents, and statewide media investigations as the era of the so-called Gladiator fights. These incidents were not rumors or exaggerated stories. They were examined in sworn testimony, inspector general audits, and federal and state investigations that shaped how the public viewed the facility. According to multiple documented sources, concerns began to rise when patterns of violence on the exercise yards appeared repeatedly in reports. Rival groups were sometimes placed together in small yard spaces, creating situations where conflict was almost guaranteed. When fights broke out, officers in tower positions were authorized to stop the violence, often by firing non-lethal rounds and, in some cases, live ammunition. Several inmates were injured during these incidents, and a number of cases resulted in fatalities. Every use of force triggered internal reviews, and over time, the number of shootings at Corcoran stood out compared to other state facilities. Whistleblowers played a significant role in bringing national attention to the situation. Some correctional officers reported that these violent encounters were more than operational mistakes. They believed certain fights were predictable, preventable, or escalated due to poor supervision. Their statements were documented in interviews, investigative files, and legal proceedings. Some staff denied wrongdoing, while others insisted the problems were deeper than individual misconduct and reflected larger issues within the system. These allegations eventually led to one of the most high-profile investigations in the history of the California Department of Corrections. A federal inquiry, a state review, and a 1998 grand jury indictment placed 8 officers on trial. The officers were later acquitted after the jury concluded that prosecutors failed to prove the shootings were unlawful or intentionally staged. But the acquittal did not erase the broader concerns raised by oversight agencies. Multiple audits concluded that the facility had patterns of communication failures, inconsistent supervision, and weaknesses in how high-risk inmate placements were managed. The impact of this era was lasting. Corcoran became the focus of national debate about prison oversight, accountability, and use of force standards. The events of the 1990s were a turning point, prompting statewide reforms that aimed to improve reporting practices, strengthen review procedures, and increase external scrutiny. This chapter did not define every aspect of Corcoran, but it shaped the most public and documented part of its legacy. As Corcoran's reputation expanded, so did public interest in the individuals housed inside its walls. Over the years, the prison held some of the most widely recognized inmates in California's correctional system. These placements were not for publicity. They were part of documented classification decisions involving individuals considered high risk or extremely difficult to manage. Among the most notable cases were transfers involving Charles Manson, whose movements between institutions were tracked by media and public records throughout the 1990s and 2000s. Other high-profile inmates included Juan Corona, identified as one of California's most prolific convicted serial offenders, and Sirhan Sirhan, whose case remains one of the most historically recognized in the state. Not all transfers of well-known inmates were publicly confirmed in real time due to safety protocols, but records and updated files later verified their presence at Corcoran during specific periods. These inmates did not define the prison, but their classifications added to the facility's image as a place chosen for individuals who required the highest levels of control. Yet the larger story of Corcoran during this era centered on more than notoriety. It focused on the way force was used within the institution. Throughout the 1990s, internal reports showed that Corcoran consistently recorded a higher number of use-of-force incidents than many other California prisons. These figures came from official audits, inspector general reviews, public documents, and court testimonies. Some incidents involved warning shots or non-lethal ammunition. Others involved live rounds fired when staff believed violence had escalated beyond physical intervention. The raw numbers alone raised concerns. Investigators questioned why shootings occurred so frequently, why certain conflicts escalated quickly, and whether communication breakdowns contributed to unsafe situations on the yards. Several reviews noted recurring issues with staff coordination, inconsistent documentation, and challenges managing rival groups within a high-risk environment. While many incidents were deemed justified under policy, oversight agencies identified deeper structural problems, issues that went beyond individual officers and reflected the strain placed on the institution itself. Supervisors were urged to improve communication, refine housing decisions, and strengthen internal controls. These findings created pressure for statewide reforms aimed at preventing unnecessary confrontations and increasing transparency in how correctional officers reported and responded to violence. Over time, the level of scrutiny shifted from incident-specific reviews to broader examinations of Corcoran's operational culture. Audits revealed that the combination of high-risk inmates, overcrowding, staff shortages, and a heavy reliance on armed response contributed to a cycle of tension. The prison was operating under conditions that made it vulnerable to conflict, and those conditions became central to public debate. Despite the controversies, many staff members emphasized the difficulty of working in an environment shaped by gang tensions, long sentences, and unpredictable behavior. Their perspectives added context to the reports, illustrating the complexity of maintaining safety in a facility where danger could emerge in seconds. The goal of the reforms that followed wasn't to undermine staff. It was to ensure that Corcoran operated with clearer oversight, stronger safeguards, and more consistent practices. By the early 2000s, the increasing attention on use of force patterns signaled that the era of unchecked practices was ending. Corcoran, once associated with some of the most troubling findings in California's correctional history, was entering a period of reassessment and reform driven by documented concerns and statewide pressure for change. Inside Corcoran, beyond the headlines and investigations, daily life has always been shaped by structure. Every inmate, regardless of classification, operates within a tightly controlled schedule designed to maintain stability in an environment where tension can rise without warning. Housing assignments vary widely. General population units hold double-cell inmates, while high-security, protective custody, and mental health units rely primarily on single-cell confinement. Administrative segregation remains reserved for individuals who require separation due to safety or disciplinary concerns. These placements are rooted in documented classification reviews and remain a defining part of how the institution manages risk. Movement inside the prison follows strict procedures. Inmates exit their cells only during scheduled times or when escorted by staff, depending on their security level. Electronic doors, camera coverage, and centrally controlled corridors limit unsupervised interaction. Yard access also differs by unit. General population inmates may exercise in larger outdoor spaces, while those in segregation or high-security housing often use smaller, enclosed recreation areas monitored by officers positioned along the perimeter. These restrictions reflect the realities of managing a population shaped by long sentences, rival group dynamics, and ongoing safety concerns. Despite these limitations, Corcoran offers various programs intended to support rehabilitation. Education courses, substance abuse treatment, and limited vocational opportunities are available depending on an inmate's classification and disciplinary history. Mental health services expanded over time as the state acknowledged a growing need for clinical support, especially in units where extended isolation could intensify existing conditions. Access to these programs has evolved, but participation remains governed by strict eligibility and security requirements. One of the most significant turning points in Corcoran's modern history involved its healthcare system. In the early 2000s, a federal court ruling determined that California's prison medical care, including the care provided at Corcoran, suffered from systemic deficiencies. Documented issues included delayed treatment, inconsistent records, staffing shortages, and inadequate chronic care management. In 2006, the entire prison medical system was placed under a federal receiver, marking one of the most consequential interventions in U.S. correctional health care. For Corcoran, this meant substantial reforms. The facility saw expansions in medical staffing, improved clinical procedures, new electronic health record systems, and increased oversight to address long-standing concerns. Mental health monitoring also became a priority, with updated protocols for suicide prevention, more frequent wellness checks, and specialized housing for individuals requiring intensive treatment. These changes did not eliminate every challenge, but they significantly altered how healthcare operates inside the institution today. Modern Corcoran reflects decades of change. While the facility continues to house high-risk individuals under strict control, it operates under far greater oversight than it did during the 1990s. Inspector General reviews, public audits, compliance checks, and continuous reporting requirements have reshaped the way incidents are documented and addressed. Many of the practices that once drew national attention have been replaced with updated policies, revised training, and increased transparency. Corcoran State Prison remains a complex environment, part of a broader system that continues to evolve under legal pressure, public scrutiny, and institutional reform. Its history includes documented controversies, significant policy changes, and efforts to stabilize a facility built for some of the state's most challenging custody cases. Today, Corcoran stands not only as a symbol of past problems, but also as a measure of how California's correctional system has been forced to confront its own shortcomings and move toward more structured oversight. Corcoran's history is a reminder that every policy, every decision, and every investigation leaves a mark long after the headlines fade. Its story is still unfolding, shaped by oversight, reform, and the ongoing challenges of managing one of California's most complex correctional environments. If you found this documentary insightful, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more fact-based deep dives into the hidden stories behind the world's most controversial prisons. Your support helps keep these real, research documentaries coming, and we're just getting started.